Dear members of nobles and officers, we've reached the final part of our ongoing series titled Misconceptions about Rome. In this closing part, we will talk about the misunderstanding most people had in their minds, that the late Roman army was weak and heavily barbarized. In order to effectively dismantle this theory, we need to look deeper into the topic and uncover the things that led to this delusion. When most people think about Roman legionaries, they immediately imagine the proud, segmented, armor-wearing professional soldiers of the Principate, who conquered land after land, nation after nation, bringing glory to Rome. However, the belief dissipates when they look at the armies of the late Roman period. For them, the soldiers look different. The helmet, armor and shield changed, and they look much more blunt compared to the armies of the Principate. The saying, "never judge a book by its cover," is applicable in this case. The sturdy and harsh-looking soldiers of the late Empire were still armed with superior equipment compared to their enemies. The weapons and armour were manufactured in state-owned fabricate, and despite being cheaper to produce and maintain, they both offered superb defensive and offensive capabilities. This change was a result of multiple factors: the different weather conditions, the expensive production costs, and the difficulty of maintenance of the segmentata. The clothing of the later imperial legionaries also differ from those of the Principate. They tended to wear long-sleeved tunics and pants, as well as shoes, rather than the famous short-sleeved tunics and caligae. Most of their clothing was also embroidered and had a multitude of symbols. It is important to briefly talk about the separation of the Western and Eastern forces. As different enemies approached the borders, both parts adapted differently. The Eastern armies faced mostly cavalry and horse archers, and thus they fielded more spearmen and archers and relied heavily on cavalry. In contrast, the Western armies faced numerous Germanic warbands due to the Great Migration and relied on skirmishers, spearmen and swordmen, with the cavalry assuming a supporting role. Thus, they had to adapt to smaller skirmishes and guerrilla warfare. In open field, the Western army was superior compared to its German counterparts and won most of its battles. Most people tend to believe the opposite, that the Western armies were mostly defeated and the invading barbarians cut through them with ease. However, this was not the case. The Western armies, under capable commanders, usually crushed their opponents in open battle, even when outnumbered significantly. What made the Western armies even more deadly was that they adapted to the guerrilla warfare of the Germanic tribes, and eventually outperformed them in that aspect as well. Usually, the Romans were on the defensive, and thus could set up ambushes and track the Germans easier, swiftly crushing them. The fighting style has drastically changed as well. Long gone were the days of the Augustan tactics, as there were more provincial and Germanic troops in the army. The battle tactics had changed as well, as these people brought their cultural concept of infantry tactics with them. In the Principate period, legionaries advanced in a silent and orderly fashion. The late legionaries moved forward loudly, banging their shields and chanting Celtic and German battle cries. One such battle cry is still known to us. It is called Barberization, and it began as a low murmuring and gradually evolved into a loud roar. While the Augustan legionaries approached the enemy slowly and in close order, threw their pylons in close range, and then charged in, the late Roman armies fought differently. The skirmishing phase lasted for a longer time. The late armies preferred to bombard the enemies with arrows, javelins and darts, and they would rather assume a defensive shield than charge their opponents. In fact, the late Roman legionaries would be described by Vegetius to have matched the archer in terms of firepower. These changes in warfare were necessary as the battle shifted from huge clashes on open terrain to more skirmishes and smaller scale conflicts. This way of combat was preferred by the Romans, as huge battles yielded more casualties which were difficult to replace, as the empire was suffering from constant plagues of attrition that was dwindling the recruitment pool. The invaders attacked various parts of the frontiers, and Rome could not allow it to send large armies immediately to negate the threat, as other parts of the borders would have been defenceless. So usually, the local limitane and pseudo-comitatus detachment needed to handle the invaders before a large field army could be sent to them. In the third part of our documentary, we would like to talk about Edward Gibbon, an English historian who wrote the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. In this work, he hypothesized that the late Roman army recruited too many barbarians, which resulted in a major decline of the army's effectiveness, leading to the fall of the empire. Previously we talked about how the army remained effective and powerful. The fall cannot be blamed on them, but rather on the frequent civil wars, which seriously weakened the ability of the Western Empire to repel or defeat invaders outside its frontiers. However, the barbarization of the army certainly happened, in a sense that many provincial and Germanic troops were recruited in the armed forces. The Novitia Dignitatum, a late Roman document about the organisation of the empire, writes about the ethnic composition of the armies and officers. It states that roughly 23 to 31% of them were of barbarian origin. Historians argue that the so-called barbarization of the army had an array of effects on the capabilities of the troops. The various Germanic and Celtic tribesmen had little to no ethnic solidarity among them. As a matter of fact, the rival tribes constantly fought amongst each other for superiority. Ammianus, a famous historian of the time, writes that the Germanic and Celtic recruits were loyal and fought just as hard for Rome as the non-barbarian soldiers, and most elite units, such as the Auxilia Palatina, have relied on first-class barbarian warriors. Thank you for embarking with us on this historical journey. We hope you enjoyed this series and look forward to the next one. Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, Roma Invicta!